boys and girls. Welcome to Story Hour. My name is Carole and I'm Media Specialist at Windmill Point Elementary School. Today our stories are all about food. The first one is Pancake Pie by Sven Nordqvist. There was once a farmer named Festus who had a cat named Mercury. They lived in a little red house with a tool shed, a hen house, a wood shed, an outhouse, and a garden. Mercury had birthdays 3 times a year, just because it was more fun that way. And every time Mercury had a birthday, Festus baked him a pancake pie. One birthday morning, Festus filled a whole basket with eggs, but he did not start the pancake pie. He sat on the bench outside the kitchen door, polishing the eggs. The eggs had to be shiny because Festus liked to do everything the right way. Mercury paced up and down on the bench. "Do you have to polish all the eggs now?" said the cat. "It'll be time for my next birthday before the pie is ready." "You're so impatient," sighed the farmer. He left the basket on the bench and took 3 eggs into the kitchen. Mercury was already inside looking for the pie pan. Festus broke the eggs into a bowl. "Now we need milk and sugar and a little salt and butter and flour," he said, but he could not find the flour. "Have you eaten all the flour, Mercury?" he called from the pantry. "I certainly have not eaten all the flour," said Mercury. "Must have done it myself then," muttered the farmer, scratching his nose. "I'll have to go to the store and buy some. You wait here, Mercury." Festus went out to get his blue bicycle, but Mercury did not want to wait there, and he dashed out ahead of the farmer. Festus was about to ride off on his bicycle when he noticed that the back tire was flat. "Did you bite a hole in this tire, Mercury?" the farmer grumbled. "I certainly never bite holes in tires," the cat spat back. "Must have done it myself then," mumbled the farmer, pulling his ear. "You wait here, Mercury, and I'll get the bicycle pump from the tool shed. Then I'll fix the tire, go to the store, and buy some flour so we can bake your pancake pie." But Mercury did not want to wait there, so he ran on ahead. When Festus got to the tool shed, the door could not be opened, and the key was missing. "Why is this door locked?" the farmer moaned. "Did you lose the key, Mercury?" "I certainly do not lose keys," Mercury replied. "Must have done it myself then," growled the farmer, poking his ear. He peered in through the window of the shed and tried the door again, but it was still locked. Then he heard Mercury whistle to him from the well. Festus hurried over. "Oh, look, there's the key right at the bottom," he said. "How did it get there? And how am I going to get it out?" Festus stared down into the well. "I know. I'll fish the key out. Have you got a long stick, Mercury?" "I certainly have never had a long stick," said Mercury. "Must have one myself then," the farmer said. "Somewhere. You just wait here, Mercury, and I'll go find one. Then I'll fish out the key, open the tool shed, fix the tire, go to the store, and buy some flour so we can bake your pancake pie." But Mercury did not want to wait there, and he ran on ahead. Festus and Mercury looked everywhere for a long stick. They looked in the hen house, behind the tool shed, in the garden, in the wood shed, behind the sofa, and in the closet, but they couldn't find a long enough stick anywhere. Then Festus remembered that he had a fishing pole in the loft above the tool shed. "I'll climb in through the skylight in the roof," he said. "But first I have to get the ladder from behind the woodshed in Hiram's field where his bull is sleeping and using the ladder as a pillow. We'll have to get it away from him. But how?" Festus thought so hard you could hear his brain ticking. "Are you any good at bullfighting?" he asked Mercury. "I certainly have never fought a bull," Mercury gasped. "Pity," chuckled Festus, "because if we can't get the ladder away from the bull, I can't get the fishing rod down from the loft and get into the tool shed, fix the tire, go to the store, and buy some flour. And then there'll be no pancake pie for your birthday." "No pancake pie? Oh my," cried Mercury. "Isn't there something I can do?" "Yes, there is. You wait here and I'll be right back." This time, Mercury waited and did not run on ahead. Festus went into the house. He took down one of the flowered kitchen curtains, and he got the old Victrola with the horn. Then he went back outside. He tied the curtain to Mercury's tail. "Now you look like a bullfighter in Spain," Festus said. He put a record on the Victrola and cranked it up. "Hiram's bull won't sleep through this," cackled the farmer. "On your mark, Mercury? Get set, but don't go yet." When the star-spangled banner blared out of the Victrola, the bull swiveled around and bellowed. Then he ducked his head, bunched up all his muscles, and thundered toward Festus and Mercury and the Victrola. "Go!" shouted Festus, and Mercury shot off like a rocket, with the flowered curtain flapping from his tail. The bull took off after the flapping curtain. Festus crawled under the fence, grabbed the ladder, and got out fast. 3 seconds later, Mercury streaked by with the curtain waving behind him. The bull stood panting at the other end of the field, but Mercury kept going anyway. He whizzed past the bench outside the kitchen door. The curtain caught on the egg basket, flipped it over, and the eggs all rolled into a puddle. Festus, who was right behind, tripped on the curtain and sat down on the eggs. "Did you leave the eggs on the bench, Mercury?" howled Festus. "I certainly did not leave any eggs on the bench," Mercury hissed. "Must have done it myself then," the farmer hissed back. Then he calmed down because it was Mercury's birthday. "I'll have to clean up this mess before I bake your pancake pie," he said. "I do like to do things the right way." Festus took a shovel and started scooping up the muddy, eggy mess. Just then, Hiram arrived. "Hi, neighbor. Working hard as usual, I see," said Hiram. "Indeed I am," Festus answered. "We're celebrating Mercury's birthday. You see, so I'm making a pancake pie." He emptied the last scoop of eggy mud from the puddle into the bucket and wiped his hands on the seat of his pants. His pants were eggy and sticky too, so he threw them into the bucket as well. Hiram's jaw dropped. "If you only have birthdays 3 times a year, you should have a real celebration," he told Hiram, pressing the pants down into the bucket. Hiram just stared at the eggy mud in the bucket. "It's my own recipe," said Festus proudly. Hiram nodded slowly. "But first I have to go to the store and buy some flour." Festus took the ladder over to the tool shed, climbed up, and disappeared over the other side of the roof. Hiram stood looking up at the roof for a long time. Then he looked at the eggy mud in the bucket and at Mercury pacing back and forth with a flowered curtain tied to his tail. The Victrola had gotten stuck and was wailing, "Home of the brave, brave, brave." Hiram looked up at the roof again and began walking away as fast as he could. Meanwhile, Festus had crawled through the skylight into the loft of the tool shed and found the fishing rod. He climbed down again, fastened a hook to the end of the rod, went to the well and fished out the key. Then he opened the door to the tool shed, fixed the tire, went to the store, bought some flour and new pants, went home again, and baked a mouth-watering pancake pie for Mercury. Then Festus and Mercury sat in the garden eating pancake pie and playing the Star-Spangled Banner on the old Victrola, just as they always did when Mercury had a birthday. Pancake Pie by Sven Nordqvist. How My Parents Learned to Eat by Ina R. Friedman, illustrated by Alan Say. In our house, some days we eat with chopsticks and some days we eat with knives and forks. For me, it's natural. When my mother met my father, she was a Japanese schoolgirl and he was an American sailor. His ship was stationed in Yokohama. Every day my father, whose name is John, walked in the park with my mother, Aiko. They sat on a bench and talked, but my father was afraid to invite my mother to dinner. If we go to a restaurant, he thought, I'll go hungry because I don't know how to eat with chopsticks. And if I go hungry, I'll act like a bear. Then Aiko won't like me. I'd better not ask her to dinner. My mother wondered why my father never invited her to dinner. Perhaps John is afraid I don't know how to eat with a knife and fork, and I'll look silly, she thought. Maybe it is best if he doesn't invite me to dinner. So they walked and talked and never ate a bowl of rice or a piece of bread together. One day the captain of my father's ship said, John, in 3 weeks the ship is leaving Japan. My father was sad. He wanted to marry my mother. How can I ask her to marry me, he thought. I don't even know if we like the same food. And if we don't, we'll go hungry. It's hard to be happy if you're hungry. I'll have to find out what food she likes, and I'll have to learn to eat with chopsticks. So he went to a Japanese restaurant. Everyone sat on cushions around low tables. My father bowed to the waiter. Please teach me to eat with chopsticks. Of course, said the waiter, bowing. The waiter brought a bowl of rice and a plate of sukiyaki. Sukiyaki is made of small pieces of meat, vegetables, and tofu. It smelled good. My father wanted to gobble it up. The waiter placed 2 chopsticks between my father's fingers. Hold the bottom chopstick still. Move the top one to pick up the food, the waiter said. My father tried, but the meat slipped off his chopstick and fell on his lap. The waiter came back with a bowl of soup. How can I eat soup with chopsticks, my father thought. Drink, said the waiter, drink from the bowl. Thank goodness, my father said. After the soup, my father felt better. He picked up the chopsticks. Finally, my father put 1 piece of meat in his mouth. Delicious. More soup, please, he said. After 3 bowls of soup, my father felt much better. Then he practiced some more with his chopsticks. Soon there was more sukiyaki in his belly than on the floor. But it was too late to call my mother. He had to run back to his ship. That night, my mother was sad. Every other day, my father had come to see her. That day, he did not come. He did not call on the telephone. Perhaps he was tired of walking and talking. Perhaps he was ashamed of her because she did not know how to eat with a knife and fork. Perhaps his ship had sailed away. All night she could not sleep. And all night my father sat on his bunk pretending to pick up sukiyaki. The next morning my father called my mother. Please, will you eat dinner with me tonight? Yes, my mother shouted into the phone. First she was happy, then she was afraid. She took her school books and ran to the house of Great Uncle. Great Uncle had visited England. He had seen the British Museum. He had eaten dinners with Englishmen. My mother knocked at the door. Great-uncle opened it. "Why are you so sad, child?" he asked. "Because I must learn to eat with a knife and fork by 7 o'clock tonight." Great-uncle nodded. "Foreign ways are quite strange. Why do you want to eat with a knife and fork?" My mother blushed. "Is it the American sailor?" Great-uncle asked. "I see. Here, take this note to your teacher. At lunchtime, I will come and take you to a foreign restaurant. By 7 o'clock tonight, you will eat with a knife and fork." My mother picked up her school bag and bowed. "No," Great-uncle stuck out his hand. "In the West, you shake hands." The restaurant had red carpets and many lights. Great-uncle pulled out a chair for my mother. "In the West, men help ladies into chairs," he told her. My mother looked at the small fork and the large fork on the left. She looked at the knife, little spoon, and big spoon on the right. Her head grew dizzy. "Different utensils for different foods," Great-uncle said. "How strange to dirty so many things," said my mother. "A chopstick is a chopstick. I can eat everything with 2 chopsticks." When the waiter brought the soup, Great-uncle pointed at the large spoon. "Dip it slowly, bring it to your mouth, sip quietly." My mother's hand trembled. The soup spilled onto the white cloth. "You'll learn," Great-uncle encouraged her. When my mother was finished with the soup, the waiter brought her a plate of mashed potatoes, roast beef, and peas. "This is the way Westerners eat," Great-uncle said. With the knife and fork, they cut the meat. Then they hold the fork upside down in their left hand. Like birds, they build a nest of mashed potatoes. They put the peas in the nest with the knife. Then they slip the nest into their mouth. Try it. The mashed potatoes were not difficult, but the peas rolled all over the plate. "Impossible," said my mother. "I'll never learn by 7 o'clock tonight." "You can learn anything," Great-uncle said. "Try again." "More mashed potatoes and please, please," he said to the waiter. At 7 o'clock, my father came to see my mother. "Why didn't you wear your kimono?" he asked. "We're going to a Japanese restaurant." "A Japanese restaurant? Don't you think I know how to eat Western food?" my mother asked. "Of course. Don't you think I know how to eat Japanese food?" "Of course." "Then tonight we'll eat meat and potatoes. Tomorrow night we'll eat sukiyaki." "Tomorrow night I will wear my kimono," my mother said. She started to bow. Then she stopped and put out her hand. My father shook it. My father ordered 2 plates of mashed potatoes, roast beef, and peas. He watched my mother cut the meat into pieces. He stared when she turned over her fork and made a bird's nest. He was amazed. "You're very clever with a knife and fork," he said. "Thank you," said my mother. "You must teach me," my father said. "That's a new way of eating peas." "Teach you?" "Yes, Americans don't eat that way." He slid his fork under some peas and put them in his mouth. My mother stared at him. "But Great-uncle taught me. He lived in England. He knows the ways of the West." My father began to laugh. "He taught you to eat like an Englishman. Americans eat differently." "Oh dear," my mother said. "A chopstick is a chopstick. Everyone uses them in the same way. Yes, when we are married, we'll eat only with chopsticks." He took her hand. "Married? If I marry you, I want to eat like an American. I'll teach you to eat with a knife and fork, and you teach me to use chopsticks." My mother shook my father's hand. My father bowed. That's why at our house, some days we eat with chopsticks and some days we eat with knives and forks. How My Parents Learned to Eat by Ina R. Friedman. Thunder Cake by Patricia, Polacco. On sultry summer days at my grandma's farm in Michigan, the air gets damp and heavy. Storm clouds drift low over the fields. Birds fly close to the ground. The clouds glow for an instant with a sharp crackling light, and then a roaring, low, tumbling sound of thunder makes the windows shudder in their panes. The sound used to scare me when I was little. I loved to go to Grandma's house. Babushka, as I used to call my grandma, had come from Russia years before. But I feared Michigan's summer storms. I feared the sound of thunder more than anything. I always hid under the bed when the storm moved near the farmhouse. This is the story of how my grandma, my babushka, helped me overcome my fear of thunderstorms. Grandma looked at the horizon, drew a deep breath, and said, "This is thunder cake baking weather all right. Looks like a storm coming to me." "Child, you come out from under that bed. It's only thunder you're hearing," my grandma said. The air was hot, heavy, and damp. A loud clap of thunder shook the house, rattled the windows, and made me grab her close. "Steady, child," she cooed. "Unless you let go of me, we won't be able to make a thunder cake today." "Thunder cake?" I stammered as I hugged her even closer. "Don't pay attention to that old thunder, except to see how close the storm is getting. When you see the lightning, start counting real slow. When you hear the thunder, stop counting. That number is how many miles away the storm is. Understand?" she asked. "We need to know how far the storm is, so we have time to make the cake and get it into the oven before the storm comes, or it won't be real thunder cake." Her eyes surveyed the black clouds away off in the distance. Then she strode into the kitchen. Her worn hands pulled a thick book from the shelf above the wood stove. "Let's find that recipe, child," she crowed as she lovingly fingered the grease-stained pages to a creased spot. "Here it is, thunder cake." She carefully penned the ingredients on a piece of notepaper. "Now let's gather all the things we'll need," she exclaimed as she scurried toward the back door. We were by the barn door when a huge bolt of lightning flashed. I started counting like Grandma told me to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then the thunder roared. 10 miles. It's 10 miles away, Grandma said as she looked at the sky. About an hour away, I'd say. "You'll have to hurry, child. Gather them eggs careful like," she said. Eggs from mean old Nenny Peck Hen. I was scared. I knew she would try to peck me. "I'm here and she won't hurt you. Just get them eggs," Grandma said softly. The lightning flashed again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I counted. 9 miles, Grandma reminded me. Milk was next. Milk from old Kick Cow. As Grandma milked her, Kick Cow turned and looked mean right at me. I was scared, she looked so big. Zip went the lightning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I counted. Baroom went the thunder. 8 miles, child, Grandma croaked. Now we have to get chocolate and sugar and flour from the dry shed. I was scared as we walked down the path from the farmhouse through tangleweed woods to the dry shed. Suddenly the lightning slit the sky. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I counted. Boom, ba-boom, crashed the thunder. It scared me a lot, but I kept walking with Grandma. Another jagged edge of lightning flashed as I crept into the dry shed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I counted. Crackle, crackle, boom, kaboom, the thunder bellowed. It was dark and I was scared. I'm here, child, Grandma said softly from the doorway. Hurry now. We haven't got much time. We've got everything but the secret ingredient. 3 overripe tomatoes and some strawberries, Grandma whispered as she squinted at the list. I climbed up high on the trellis. The ground looked a long way down. I was scared. I'm here, child, she said. Her voice was steady and soft. You won't fall. I reached 3 luscious tomatoes. Before she picked strawberries, lightning again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I counted. Kabang, boom, a room, the thunder growled. We hurried back to the house and the warm kitchen, and we measured the ingredients. I poured them into the mixing bowl while Grandma mixed. I churned butter for the frosting and melted chocolate. Finally, we poured the batter into the cake pans and put them into the oven together. Lightning lit the kitchen. I only counted to 3 and the thunder rumbled and crashed. 3 miles away, Grandma said, and the cake is in the oven. We made it. We'll have a real thunder cake. As we waited for the cake, Grandma looked out the window for a long time. Why, you aren't afraid of thunder. You're too brave, she said as she looked right at me. I'm not brave, Grandma, I said. I was under the bed, remember? But you got out from under it, she answered. And you got eggs from me, old Nellie Peck hen. You got milk from old Kick Cow. You went through tangleweed woods to the dry shed. You climbed the trellis in the barnyard. From where I sit, only a very brave person could have done all them things. I thought and thought as the storm rumbled closer. She was right. I was brave. Brave people can't be afraid of a sound, child, she said as we spread out the tablecloth and set the table. When we were done, we hurried into the kitchen to take the cake out of the oven. After the cake had cooled, we frosted it. Just then the lightning flashed, and this time it lit the whole sky. Even before the last flash had faded, the thunder rolled, boomed, crashed, and baroomed just above us. The storm was here. Perfect, Grandma cooed. Just perfect. She beamed as she added the last strawberry to the glistening chocolate frosting on top of our thunder cake. As rain poured down on our roof, Grandma cut a wedge for each of us. She poured us steaming cups of tea from the samovar. When the thunder roared above us so hard it shook the windows and rattled the dishes in the cupboards, we just smiled and ate our thunder cake. From that time on, I never feared the voice of thunder again. Thunder Cake by Patricia Polacco. The Old Woman and the Rice Thief, adapted from a Bengali folk tale by Betsy Bang, illustrated by Molly Garrett Bang. There was once an old woman who loved rice. Every morning she boiled half of her rice and left it soaking in a pot of cold water. With the other half she made murrey, and put some of it on the oven to stay warm. In this way she always had cold boiled rice in the soaking pot and warm puffed rice on the oven. The old woman was content until a thief appeared. He came each night and stole some cold boiled rice from the soaking pot and some murrey from the oven. So the old woman took her walking stick and set out to complain to the Rajah. Soon she came to the edge of a pond. In the pond was a scorpion fish who said to her, "Old woman, where are you going?" "Every night a thief steals my rice. I'm going to complain to the Rajah." The scorpion fish said, "On your way home, take me with you, and you will be glad that you did." "Ah, sha," said the old woman. As she walked along the road, she came to a wood apple tree. A wood apple had fallen to the ground, and it said, "Old woman, where are you going?" "Every night a thief steals my rice, so I'm going to tell the Rajah." The wood apple said, "On your way home, take me with you, and you will be glad that you did." "Ah, ksha," said the old woman. A little farther along she saw a razor. The razor said, "Old woman, where are you going?" "Every night a thief steals my rice, and I'm going to complain to the Rajah." The razor said, "On your way home, take me with you, and you will be glad that you did." "Ah, sha," said the old woman. As she walked along, there was a cowpat lying in the road. And when the old woman stepped over it, the cowpat said, "Old woman, where are you going?" "Every night a thief steals my rice, so I'm on my way to tell the Rajah." "On your way home, take me with you, and you will be glad that you did." "Ah, sha," said the old woman. Just before the old woman reached the Rajah's palace, she saw an alligator in the river. The alligator said, "Old woman, where are you going?" "Every night a thief eats my rice, and I'm going to make a complaint to the Rajah." The alligator said, "On your way home, take me with you, and you will be glad that you did." "Ah, sha," said the old woman. When she came to the Rajah's palace, she found that the Rajah was out hunting tigers, and that she would have to come back another day. On her way home, she picked up the alligator, and the cowpat, and the razor, the wood apple, and the scorpion fish, and put them in her sack. When they came to her house, the alligator said, "Leave me here in your pond." The cowpat said, "Put me at the bottom of the stairs." The razor said, "Put me down in the grass near the cowpat." The wood apple said, "Put me in the oven." The scorpion fish said, "Put me in the soaking pot with the cold boiled rice." Then the old woman had a supper of murrey and said good night to them all and went to bed. In the middle of the night the thief came. He sneaked inside and reached into the soaking pot to steal some of the cold boiled rice. Inside was the scorpion fish. It stung the thief so many times that he jumped up and down with pain. Then he went to the oven to steal some murrey. When he touched the pot, the wood apple exploded in his face. The hot seeds stung him all over, and the noise scared him out of his wits. So he dashed outside. But in the dark he slipped on the cowpat and sat down with a thud on top of the razor. He scrambled up squealing and ran to the pond to wash himself off. As soon as he touched the water, the alligator bit him. "Ee-I!" he squealed. The old woman ran after him yelling, "Thief, thief!" All of this noise woke the neighbors, and everyone joined in the chase to catch the thief. And they chased him so far he never came back. After that, the old woman always had boiled rice in the soaking pot and murrey on the oven. The Old Woman and the Rice Thief by Betsy Bang. Our next story is by Margaret Mahy. It's called Jam, and it's a true story. Mr. and Mrs. Castle lived in a white house with a big green lawn. Their 3 children were called Clement, Clarissa, and Carlo. 3 little castles, said Mr. Castle, but very small ones, more like cottages, really. Mrs. Castle was studying to be an atomic scientist. What a clever one she is, said Mr. Castle. If she decided to go to the moon, I don't think she'd even need a rocket to get there. One day, Mrs. Castle announced that she had found herself a job. Important scientists were developing an electronic medicine to cure sunspots, and they had sent for Mrs. Castle. But who's going to look after us? Asked Clement. Isn't anyone going to be here when we come home from school? Asked Clarissa. Carlo was too young to say anything, but he looked worried. I shall be here, my dear little cottages, Mr. Castle cried. You have no reason to be anxious. He washed and dried the dishes. He swept the house from top to bottom. He vacuumed the carpets, put the dough to rise in a warm place, wiped down the counter, had a quick cup of tea, planted a row of cabbages, folded the wash, baked the bread and a cake, put Carlo down for his afternoon sleep, had another cup of tea, cleaned the bath, prepared dinner, read the paper, kissed the children when they came home from school, and Mrs. Castle when she came home from work, and asked them all what sort of day they had had. Then he gave Mrs. Castle something to drink, handed her the paper, and took the children out for a game on the big green lawn. He was an excellent house father. Indeed, he was so good that one day he actually ran out of work. While he tried to think of just what to do next, there came a soft thud on the roof, and then another one. Sunspots, cried Mr. Castle, and ran outside. It was not the sound of falling sunspots he had heard, but ripe plums tumbling off the old plum tree that grew behind the house. Mr. Castle was delighted. Gathering up the fallen plums, he made 3 pots of plum jam. Jam, what a treat, the children cried. The next day, many more plums fell from the tree, and Mr. Castle made 20 pots of plum jam. The following day, the ground under the tree was covered with big purple plums. That day, Mr. Castle had enough plums to make 30 pots of jam. But the day after that, there were even more plums. Mr. Castle ran out of jam jars. What a challenge, he cried. Not a single plum must be wasted. He filled all the vases in the house with jam. He filled all the glasses, too. Even Carlo's rabbit mug and the teapot were filled with jam. The whole house is like a jam factory, said Clement. It's like a school for jam pots, said Clarissa. Your father is a born artist, said Mrs. Castle. He is the Picasso of jam makers. Now all the work is done, said Mr. Castle, looking pleased. We can look forward to eating this delicious jam all year long. They began with jam sandwiches. Mrs. Castle, Clement, and Clarissa had jam sandwiches in the lunches Mr. Castle prepared for them every morning. Carlo, who was cutting new teeth, had jam on his crusts. Hooray, called Mr. Castle. We've emptied the teapot already. We'll be able to have tea with our cakes, cookies, and tarts. That winter, the roof leaked a little. Mr. Castle's jam proved very useful, for as well as being delicious, it stopped leaks. When the tiles came off the bathroom floor, Mr. Castle stuck them down again with jam. After weeks of devoted jam eating, they could put flowers in the vases again. and drink from glasses instead of from egg cups. I wouldn't really care if I never saw another pot of jam in my life, Clarissa whispered to Clement, but don't tell Daddy I said so. In the meantime, they had jam with everything, and on everything, and under everything. Their dreams became haunted with jam. Clement dreamed that the sky opened and jam rained down on him. Clarissa dreamed of fat, shadowy jam pots marching through the night, crying out a terrible war cry of jam, jam, jam. Mrs. Castle dreamed that it was proved that sunspots were caused by too much jam, and Carlo dreamed great jammy dreams as well. Their days were full of jam eating, and their nights of dreams all dripping with jam. Finally, one morning, Mr. Castle went to the cupboard to get down the next pot of jam, only to find it was empty. There was not a single potful left. "Let's have egg sandwiches for lunch," said Mrs. Castle. "Let's have fish and chips," suggested Clement. "Spaghetti and salad," cried Clarissa. "But first, let's have a game on the lawn," said Mr. Castle. "We've eaten so much jam that we look like jam pots ourselves. We shall have to get back in shape." While they were playing on the lawn, Mr. Castle heard a soft thud on the roof. The plums were ripe again. Margaret Mahy's Jam. I hope you liked it. Here's a story of two lovable fellows, Big Gus and Little Gus, by Lee Lorenz. Long ago, there lived two friends named Big Gus and Little Gus. Little Gus was a dreamer and full of schemes for getting rich. Big Gus was just big. One day, Little Gus persuaded his friend to set out with him to seek their fortunes. They had only gone a short distance when they came to an abandoned, tumble-down hut. "Let's rest here a while," said Little Gus. "I'm tired." "All right," said Big Gus. He wasn't tired, but he always agreed with whatever Little Gus said. "This is perfect," exclaimed Little Gus, looking inside the empty hut. "I can work here on my plans, and you can go out and earn some money for us to live on." "If you say so," replied Big Gus. "And when you get paid, put your wages in your boot so you won't lose them." "I won't forget," said Big Gus. The next day was Monday. Big Gus went to a nearby farm and got a job picking apples. When he was finished, the farmer paid him, not with coins, but with 6 of the reddest and juiciest apples. Remembering what Little Gus had told him, Big Gus put 3 apples in each boot. It was a tight fit, but he finally got them back on and started home. Big Gus stepped as lightly as he could, but by the time he got home, his shoes were full of applesauce. "Well, we certainly can't eat that," said Little Gus. "Here, I have been working all day, and because of your foolishness, we have nothing for supper but the biscuits we brought with us. The next time, put your earnings in your pocket." "I certainly will," said Big Gus, as he prepared for bed. Early Tuesday morning, Big Gus got a job milking cows. At the end of the day, the farmer gave him as wages a large pail of fresh milk. Remembering what Little Gus had said, Big Gus opened his pocket as wide as he could and carefully poured all the milk into it. Big Gus ran all the way home, but of course by the time he got there, every drop of milk had spilled out. "Look at you," cried Little Gus. "Don't you know you can't carry milk in your pocket? You should have carried the pail on your head." "I'm sorry," said Big Gus. I certainly will next time." Bright and early Wednesday morning, Big Gus went into town and got a job in a bakery. All morning he worked at the oven baking delicious pies and cakes. Little Gus will certainly be glad to have some of these, he thought. But when it came time to be paid, every cake and pie in the store had been sold. So the baker went to the larder and found a big wheel of cheese which he gave Big Gus as payment. Just as Little Gus had told him, Big Gus placed the cheese on his head. But the sun was still high in the sky, and as he headed home, the cheese began to melt. "A beautiful cheese, and you've ruined it," cried Little Gus. "You don't carry a wheel of cheese on your head. You should have rolled it home." "I'm sorry," said Big Gus. "I promise I will next time." And again they went to bed with nothing but crumbs for supper. On Thursday, Big Gus worked all day for a butcher who paid him with a beautiful smoked ham. "I'll get it right this time," thought Big Gus. So he rolled the ham all the way home. When Big Gus arrived home, Little Gus was sitting in the doorway working on his notes. Big Gus showed him the ham, but by now it was nothing but a big, dirty bone. "How could you be such a numbskull?" said Little Gus as he divided the last of their biscuits. "Rolling a ham in the dirt? You should have carried it on your shoulder." "I will tomorrow without fail," replied Big Gus. The next day was Friday. Big Gus was determined to do the right thing this time. He was hired by a blacksmith and worked hard all day shoeing horses. For pay, the blacksmith gave him a magnificent mule. Little Gus said, "Carry it on your shoulders," thought Big Gus. So with a sigh, he heaved the mule onto his back and headed home. Now on the way home, Big Gus passed the house of a wealthy man whose daughter could not speak. Doctors said she would never talk until someone made her laugh. She was strolling in the garden with her father when Big Gus staggered by with the mule on his back. When she saw him, she suddenly burst into laughter. She laughed so hard tears rolled down her cheeks. "Oh, Father," she cried, "what a funny man. Ask him to stay with us so that I can laugh all the time." The wealthy man was astonished to hear his daughter speak. "It's a miracle," he cried, running after Big Gus. "Young man, you have brought laughter back into our lives and made my daughter speak. Won't you come and live with us?" "That's very kind," said Big Gus, "but I will have to ask my friend, who is at this very moment waiting for me and my mule." "Your friend can live with us too," said the wealthy man impatiently. "Hurry and ask him." So Big Gus hurried home as fast as anyone could with a mule on his back. Before Little Gus could say a word, he told him all about the wealthy man and his daughter. "And he wants you to come and live there too. What should we do?" Replied Little Gus. "He probably could use someone like me to manage his affairs." Then he jumped out of the hammock and ran to the rich man's house so quickly that Big Gus could hardly keep up. The very next day they moved in. As time passed, Big Gus and the rich man's daughter grew very fond of each other and were married. And for many years afterward, as Little Gus continued to develop his schemes, they all lived happily together. The rich man, Little Gus, Big Gus's wife, and eventually little baby Gus. Big Gus and Little Gus by Lee Lorenz. Mr. MacGregor's Breakfast Egg, a story by Elizabeth MacDonald and pictures by Alex Aliff. Early one morning, Mother Duck and her ducklings set off for a swim. They were going to the pond down the road, but when they reached the bottom of the hill, they found Mr. Cameron's truck blocking their path. "Quack, quack," said Mother Duck. "Cheep, cheep," said the ducklings, but the truck didn't move. Mr. Cameron wanted to deliver some corn to Mr. MacGregor, the farmer who lived on the hill, but he couldn't because a herd of cattle was in his way. "Beep, beep," Mr. Cameron honked his horn. "Quack, quack," said Mother Duck. "Cheep, cheep," said the ducklings. But the cattle couldn't move because the road ahead was full of boys on bicycles going camping. "Moo, moo," went the cattle. "Beep, beep," Mr. Cameron honked his horn. "Quack, quack," said Mother Duck. "Cheep, cheep," said the ducklings. But the boys couldn't move because a bus full of drummers on its way to a concert was in their way. "Bring, bring," the boys rang their bells. "Moo, moo," went the cattle. "Beep, beep," Mr. Cameron honked his horn. "Quack, quack," said Mother Duck. "Cheep, cheep," said the ducklings. But the bus was stuck behind a man with a motorcycle on his way to the river to fish. Bang, bang, the drummers hit their drums. Bring, bring, the boys rang their bells. Moo, moo, went the cattle. Beep, beep, Mr. Cameron honked his horn. Quack, quack, said Mother Duck. Cheep, cheep, said the ducklings. But the man on the motorcycle couldn't move because he couldn't get past a flock of bleating sheep which had strayed from the hill. The sheep didn't know which way to go without the help of Mr. MacGregor's sheepdog Shep, and Shep was waiting for his master to finish his breakfast. Mr. MacGregor had eaten his porridge and was waiting for Mrs. MacGregor to cook him an egg before he started work. Mrs. MacGregor was waiting for Jamie, their son, to bring the egg from the little brown hen who lived in the hen coop behind the cottage. But the little brown hen wouldn't lay an egg unless Jamie gave her some corn, and there was no more corn until Mr. Cameron came to deliver it. Jamie looked down the road and saw the long line stretching back to Mr. Cameron's truck. He grabbed a bucket and ran down the hill. "Please, Mr. Cameron," he panted, "may I have a little corn to feed the hen until you reach the cottage?" "Yes, Jamie, of course you may," said Mr. Cameron, and Jamie took it up to the little brown hen as fast as he could. Cluck, cluck, she was so pleased that she laid the egg that was keeping everyone waiting. Jamie took it to his mother. His mother cooked it for his father. His father ate it and left the cottage, whistling to Shep. Woof, woof, ba, ba. Shep drove the sheep back to the hillside. Vroom, vroom, the man on the motorcycle went on his way to the river. Bang, bang, the bus full of drummers drove off to the concert. Bring, bring, the boys pedaled away towards their campsite. Moo, moo, the cattle went along the road to their grazing ground. Mr. Cameron delivered the rest of the corn to the little brown hen, and Mother Duck and her ducklings could swim in the pond at last. Quack, quack, cheep, cheep. Mr. MacGregor's Breakfast Egg, story by Elizabeth MacDonald. The Magic Porridge Pot by Paul Galdone. Once upon a time, long, long ago, a little girl and her mother lived in a small cottage at the end of the village street. They were so poor that often there was nothing to eat in the house but a small piece of bread. When their cupboard was bare, the little girl would go into the forest near the cottage to search for nuts and berries. One chilly morning she wandered through the dark forest, but she could not find a single nut or berry. At last the little girl sat down on a fallen tree and started to cry. "There's no food for Mother and me. What will we do? We're so hungry." "Cheer up, my dear," said a pleasant but crackly voice. The little girl looked up in surprise to see an old woman who wore a long cloak and leaned on a crooked stick. "Do not worry, my dear," said the old woman. "You need never be hungry again." From under her cloak she drew out a small black pot. "This is a magic pot, my dear. After you put it on the fire, you must say to it, 'Boil, little pot, boil,' and at once it will fill up with delicious porridge. When you have had all you can eat, you must say to it, 'Stop, little pot, stop,' and the magic pot will stop boiling." "Oh, thank you so much," said the little girl. "Never forget the magic words, my dear," said the old woman. "Never forget." And no sooner had she said this than she vanished. The little girl carried the pot home as fast as she could run through the forest. "What have you there?" her mother asked. "This is a magic pot that will cook delicious porridge," the little girl explained. "An old woman gave it to me in the forest." The little girl was eager to try out the magic pot. She set it on the fire and said, "Boil, little pot, boil." Sure enough, delicious porridge bubbled up. When they had had all that they could eat, the little girl said, "Stop, little pot, stop," and the magic pot stopped boiling. For a long time the little girl and her mother had as much porridge as they wanted, and they were very happy and contented. Then one day the little girl decided to visit her friend at the other end of the village. The little girl was gone a long while, and her mother began to be hungry. So she set the magic pot on the fire and said to it, "Boil, little pot, boil." The porridge began to rise in the pot, and the mother dished out a nice bowlful. Soon the porridge was bubbling at the top of the pot, but the mother had forgotten the magic words. The porridge kept on rising and began to spill over the rim. "Halt, little pot, halt," the mother said. The porridge only boiled and bubbled over faster. "Enough, little pot, enough," cried the mother, trying to remember the right words. The porridge flowed down until it covered the floor of the cottage. The mother struggled to the door and opened it wide to let the porridge flow out of the house. "No more, little pot, no more," she shouted. The stream of delicious porridge flowed through the cottage door and onto the street. Down the street ran the mother, screaming, "Cease, little pot, cease!" But the porridge flowed on and on toward the very last house in the village where the little girl was visiting. When the mother reached the house, she called, "Help, help! The magic pot keeps boiling, boiling, boiling." At once the little girl guessed what was wrong. So she waded into the thick, heavy porridge and ran home as fast as she could with her mother behind her. When the little girl reached the cottage, she cried, "Stop, little pot, stop! Stop, little pot, stop! Stop, little pot, stop! Stop, little pot, stop!" And the magic pot stopped boiling. Then everyone in the village came out into the street carrying dippers, spoons, cups, bowls, buckets, platters, pans, plates, and pitchers. They dipped up the porridge, and they scooped up the porridge, and they spooned up the porridge. There was enough porridge for everyone to feast on for days and days. The Story of the Magic Porridge Pot by Paul Galdone.